before everything goes wrong, this happened to me between 2018 and 2019 in the interior of Minas Gerais, in a town too small to easily appear on a map. It's the kind of place where silence has weight, where night falls early, where people avoid asking questions. I was going through the worst phase of my life. I had just lost my job, my marriage had ended, and all I wanted was to disappear for a while. That's when the opportunity arose to live in an old house that had belonged to a distant relative of the family. No one competed for that house. That should have been the first warning. At home, it was located almost 20 minutes from the center on a dirt road. It was large, old, with thick walls and a roof that creaked even when there was no wind. From the outside, it just looked abandoned. Inside, something was wrong. The air was heavy, not foul, just dense, as if breathing required more effort in there. On the first night, I slept poorly, but attributed it to tiredness. On the second, I woke up with the feeling of being watched. On the third, I was certain of it. The schedule, always at 3:17 a.m. It didn't matter how tired I was. It didn't matter if I went to bed early or late. My body would wake up on its own at the same minute every night. And I always had the same feeling. Someone was in the room with me. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel it. The presence had weight. The silence grew louder. The cold appeared suddenly. And then, one early morning, I heard breathing. It didn't come from my heart. The wardrobe. There was an old wardrobe in the room. Dark wood, heavy doors. I always closed it before going to sleep, but every morning it was open. On the fourth night, I mustered up the courage and left a chair leaning against the door to prove to myself that it wasn't sleepwalking. I woke up at 3:17 a.m. The chair was on the floor, and the door wide open. Inside, the smell was different. Old, damp, like wet earth. The steps. It was in the second week that I heard the footsteps for the first time. They came from the corridor. Dragging, slow, irregular. Those weren't the steps of a healthy person. They looked painful. I picked up my cell phone to call the police. The screen wouldn't turn on. When I looked up, I saw something standing at the end of the hallway. It had no defined shape. It was too tall, too dark, as if the light itself avoided touching it. He wasn't moving, but I felt like he was watching me. The first message, I closed my eyes for a few seconds. When I opened them, he was closer, leaning against the wall of my room. That's when I heard the voice, not through my ears, inside my head. "You shouldn't have stayed." I cried that night like I hadn't cried since I was a child. The city, the next day, I went to a nearby bar and asked about the house. The man behind the counter remained silent. Then he simply said, "Nobody can stand living there." An older neighbor told me that years ago an entire family had lived there. The father went mad. The mother stopped speaking. The son disappeared. The house was passed down from relative to relative, always empty, always abandoned. The walls, I started hearing whispers coming from the walls. They weren't clear words, but they were voices. Sometimes they cried, sometimes they begged, sometimes they laughed. I stopped sleeping in the bedroom. I moved to the living room. It didn't help. At 3:17 a.m., I woke up. The mirror. There was an old mirror in the bathroom. One early morning when I woke up at the cursed hour, I went over there. My reflexes were delayed. I raised my hand. The reflex was slow. Then he smiled. "I am not." The name I started dreaming about people calling me by my name, but they always got a letter wrong. They always said a name that was almost identical to mine. Until one night, the voice said, "That's not his name." That's when I found boxes of old documents in the basement of the house. My name was written on them. Old dates, photos of people who weren't family, but had my face on them. The truth. The house wasn't haunted. She kept it. It preserved memories. It preserved identities. It preserved people who stayed too long. Those who lived there didn't leave in one piece. Last night, I woke up at 3:17 a.m. This time, there was no shadow. There were several. They were standing around the bed, and they all had my face. The final voice was clear. "Now you belong to the house, too." After I left the next day, I left everything behind. But even today, I wake up at 3:17 a.m. And sometimes, when I look in the mirror, it takes me a few seconds to recognize myself, because part of me still lives in that house.